Hello everyone and welcome back yet again to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning into today's show. We should have a great show ahead for you today. We're going to do a general prop bet preview for Sunday's slate of games I got you covered yesterday. If you did not check that out for Thursday Night Football, I wish you the best watching experience for that game. And then I also have you covered for some college football action. A big week in terms of college football for that kind of area. And then, of course, I round out my positional rankings with my defense and special teams rankings for this upcoming week. I give you an injury update, and then last but not least, I have a new tradition on my show, Chris's Picks, where I pick 4 or 5 games from the week in terms of my betting perspective on them. But before we get into any of that, I do want to remind you to consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show and the network as a whole if you feel so inclined. It is greatly appreciated by all involved with the show and the network, especially me and my fellow podcasters. Go check them out as well. But also, if you want to contribute to the show more outright while it is going on, you can make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Things, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. You can press that $sign, leave a comment, and it will pop up on my screen, and I will be able to read it aloud. I definitely want your opinion throughout this show. It just makes it so much better, makes the network so much better, and is greatly appreciated by all in the network as well. But without further ado, let's jump right into today's show, starting off with our first segment of the day, and that will be my Week 6 prop bets. Of course, this is a popular segment on the show, kind of taking a break from Thursday night and all the action going on there. Looking ahead to the weekend, Sunday's games should be a good week in the NFL as always, and I have a good list of prop bets for you all that I think will hit, but some are a little bit of a long shot. Might be for the more ambitious of you out there. Without further ado, let's jump right into the first one. Let's start off with a pretty simple one, but based off of his heroics last Thursday night against the Buccaneers. That is Kirk Cousins. I feel like the thing about Kirk Cousins is that they found a rhythm for him in which he can play comfortable and competent football. Yes, I still have concerns about how he's going to look when he's pressured a little bit more, because he still kind of plays with the timidity of someone coming off an Achilles injury. But at the end of the day, he still is very much a guy who can play that game manager role for you. He's not the sexiest option at the QB position by any means necessary, but he's going to get the job done if you give him the surroundings and the circumstances to succeed in this system. And he's going to go against the Panthers, who have improved under Andy Dalton, but he can improve the defense, which still remains one of the weakest in the NFL. And Kirk Cousins is going to be willing to exploit that. He's going to be someone who can diagnose their coverages, say, okay, I'm not going to take that many deep shots, but I will if they give them to me, and play smart football. And that's what you want out of a guy like Kirk Cousins at this stage in his career. And for a Falcons team that just needs a guy who can distribute the ball comfortably to their myriad number of weapons that they have at their disposal. And so the reason being for him hitting the over is because I just feel like he's now becoming a guy you can constantly rely on in many facets of the fantasy and betting world. So I'm picking over 241.5 yards and minus 137. And I think it will be an easy hit for you to start this week. So starting off pretty easy, pretty light with my first prop bet here. The second one, a little bit of an ambitious one. Maybe not as much as of a long shot as people think, as Andre enters the chat. Welcome, my man. But Caleb Williams, as Andre's saying, big game for Seattle tonight. I am in between dreading it and hoping that they can pull out the win, but it is a massive game at home for the Seattle Seahawks, as Andre said, perfect window for you guys to beat the Niners. And I agree, but there just feels something about our injuries that feel more significant than the Niners. I feel like you can't account for a whole entire defensive line meant to stop the run game being injured. And the 49ers rotating in and out of their running game like it's the easiest thing on planet Earth. As Andre said, I think you guys can win, but you have to stop the run. That's exactly the game plan that I feel needs to be set out. And if we don't execute that, then this could be, in my humble opinion, a blowout. I still respect our offense highly. As Andre said, so many injuries, no Woolen and the linebackers are cooked. I agree with that sentiment as well. Almost at every single level of the defense, you can find significant injuries that impact Seattle. But on the offense side of the ball, I feel like they can find ways to make this respectable. As Andre also says, this is probably a bounce-back game for the Niners realistically, though. I agree. But in terms of keeping it close, I realistically feel as if the Seattle offense can. It's going to be all about establishing their run game specifically, because Kenneth Walker, I feel, is the most integral part of the puzzle of the Seattle offense. When he's playing and he's on. But at the end of the day, I just feel like the 49ers, this is a get-right game for them. And they just have less injuries than us at this point. We might be able to get them down the road. We're fully healthy, but not right now. Going back to this Caleb Williams prop bet here. This is going to be a frustrating one to kind of justify because of the fact, as Andre also says, I think K9 is a monster game. He does tend to have big games against bigger opposition, but at this point, I just want to see, the Seattle offense play a perfect game, which is something that they can't necessarily do against certain teams. And he says the question is, does he get 15 plus touches? That's the big thing. I think that if he doesn't, then it spells trouble, because as much as I love Geno and what he's done this season, he can't carry the burden of this entire offense. But who knows? But getting back into this Caleb Williams prop bet here, I feel like the frustrating nature of it is that I feel like it's not necessarily going to be as much one step forward, two steps back for Caleb, as much as it's going to be going through certain learning pains. And this is a tougher game than people think against a Jags team that, is kind of still in that worst team tier in the NFL, but can find ways to, frustrate you, especially defensively. And Caleb, not for nothing, is someone who I appreciate seeing the growth patterns throughout his first couple of starts, but this certainly feels like one of those trap games where all of that progress kind of go away. And so I'm going to say he's going to hit the under in this game at 234.5 at minus 110. So take that with a grain of salt, because some people might point to his past performances and showing his signs of improvement in each of them. But I feel at this point, this feels like a Bears offense that still has a lot to go through before we can really justify saying we've seen the real Caleb Williams these past couple of weeks. And then the next one I want to go over is another kind of weird one as well, especially with the coaching change. But Breece Hall going up on Monday night against the Bills with a new head coach, an interim head coach in Jeff Ulbrich, and questions surrounding the offense. I feel like he will be the biggest X factor. As Andre says, Jags defense does suck, though. I feel like they do, but in many ways, they are more opportunistic than you think. Let's not forget that to start the season, they did hold Miami with Tua healthy to 20 points and only one really big play. And yes, we can point to their absolutely atrocious performances against the Bills. But this feels like a weird game for me to diagnose and say that Caleb will look either good or look bad, much like he did to start the season. So that's why I feel like Caleb will struggle in this game. I don't necessarily think he's going to play bad, but it's just not going to show up in the stat sheet what he's going to be able to do in this game, if that makes sense. But in the Breece Hall side of things, I feel like he has to be the X factor going forward in this Jets offense. He has to be the difference maker. And at over 51.5 yards and minus 137, I feel like that's a bargain bet. I feel like that's a bargain for ambitious bettors, because Breece Hall, I feel like you have to get going to get Aaron Rodgers going, because that's the equation that I feel best works moving forward for the Jets. As Anya says, I think Caleb has a better chance to throw 2 touchdowns than hit his yards prop. And I agree, because he has been consistent in finding the end zone over the past couple of weeks. Let me be clear in that. But I just feel like in terms of stat-wise, he's just been so erratic, and we can't predict what he's been able to do. And I just feel like his abilities best show up in the small things, in the details of the game, instead of, the yardage totals and the touchdown totals. So yeah, that's why I think it's a weird prop bet and a weird game to bet on in general. But the next one I want to go over, before we head to a quick break, I had some others, is J.K. Dobbins, because I've been singing this guy's praises to start the season. He's going up against a surprisingly decent Broncos defense right now, after a bye, and I just feel like, the Chargers are the weirdest team to have a bye early in the season, because we can't really gauge their progress under Harbaugh. We can't really gauge if his philosophies have set in, right? And also with all the injuries to Herbert and things of that nature, we can't really trust the fact that this offense is something that could be sustainable. So J.K. Dobbins, though, is still someone who is a difference maker for the Chargers. He's going to get the ball more often than not, and over 57.5 yards and minus 137. That's a bargain. And the last 2 bets, I'll go through them very quickly. Amon-Ra St. Brown going up against the Cowboys, under 77.5. He's having a very up and down season. I don't know why, but I still hold the highest regard for him. And then Roma Dunze will hit the over, actually, in turn, instead of, Caleb Williams hitting his over at over 34.5 yards at minus 130. I think you'll have at least 1 or 2 big plays in this game. I feel like Caleb will start to trust him a little bit more, especially in the red zone, rather than, just focus on developing his rapport with DJ Moore, because I think it's that rapport with DJ Moore is very important. But I feel like Roma Dunze and him understand each other a little bit more than, say, Caleb and DJ Moore. And Andre's going, I agree the Lions are going to be pounding the run game all day. Absolutely. And who wouldn't against that Cowboys front, because it's atrocious. One of the worst run Ds in the entire NFL. So I completely agree with that sentiment. I feel like the Lions just find so many ways to beat you that they don't really need to worry about Amon-Ra's production with any sense of urgency. It's just that that's the way it is right now for the Lions. If they run the football, I feel like they have the best chance of winning, and they're the best chance of being perhaps the best team in the NFC that way. So I completely agree with that. But we do have to take a quick break, unfortunately. And when we come back on the other side, we transition from prop bets in the NFL to general bets in college football. Should be a crazy week in that kind of field. We'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of the day, before, of course, Andre, I will get to your comments in just a second, but I do need to remind you yet again that if you do feel so inclined, please consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. You could also donate at gsmcpodcast.net, but if you want to contribute to the show with some immediacy as you're watching, this is the best way. You can press the $, leave a comment, and it will pop up on my screen and I will read it out loud. It's a great way to contribute and interact. Get your own opinions out there for the show. We appreciate every single one of them that we get, and we'll continue doing it for both my show and other shows across the network. Will just make the network that much better, and we'll continue to give you guys good content. But without further ado, let's jump right into Andre's comments first of all, and then our second segment of the day. Andre says, no Micah or D-Law, too right, referring to the absence of both of those players for the Cowboys in that game against the Lions. And I think that they will be absent. I haven't heard any news to kind of get away from that notion. So that's another worrying thing that the Cowboys are going to have to monitor. And then he suggests, as a Packers fan, he's giving them a very slim chance to beat Detroit this season due to their run defense. And not for nothing, I do feel like the Packers do kind of profile in that way, but they are very opportunistic. So if Jared Goff, when he does pass, is a little bit erratic, as we saw earlier in the season, then there are chances for the Packers to pick their poison in that game. When they do play them, I think it's going to be a very competitive game. And they're still the two best teams, I would say, in that division. I still have to see a little bit more out of the Vikings to truly convince me that they have staying power. But at the end of the day, I think that they're the two best teams in that division when they step on the football field together. And we'll see it in that game. I wish the Packers the best of luck in that one. It's going to be a good one. But at the end of the day, it's all about how the Lions game plan sets up. But I do want to get into college football a little bit. As Andre said, the Lions' pass defense is horrendous, and I completely agree with that. As a Seattle fan, I saw that firsthand. But, against, different teams, I feel like they'll find ways to improve. And if they find, a stretch of manageable games, then who knows how, quote-unquote, good they'll look. But it is a good point to point out about the Lions. But I do want to get into college football a little bit. Huge week in the world of college football. Week 7 we are in right now. A lot of rivalry games, a lot of heavyweight matchups across different conferences as well. So I just want to keep you updated on all of them. We will be quick in this regard, but I just want to kind of capture the excitement and hype around some certain games, starting off with one of my favorite games as a Texas fan each year, the Red River Rivalry, Texas-Oklahoma. Texas favored by 15.5 points now. Sorry about that. The line did move after I made that graphic. Over under 54.5. Money lines, Texas minus 650. OU plus 475. So I can see a hefty margin in the betting odds there. This should be a good one. I feel like Oklahoma has had Texas's number over the past couple of years, but this feels like a year that the shift in momentum is starting to shift towards Texas. Quentin Ewers confirmed to play in this game, and I feel like for Texas to win this game, they just need to get Quentin Ewers into a rhythm. He's all about being that rhythm quarterback that creates the tempo of the game, controls the football, protects it, and most importantly knows how to put points on the board. On the Oklahoma side of things, I've heard great things about their young true freshman QB, Michael Hawkins Jr., and how poised and calm he is in pressure situations. But this is a different animal, I think. I feel like as one of the first true freshman QBs to start in a game against Texas of this magnitude, especially, it's going to take a huge effort. He knows that his defense is a solid unit and can find ways to limit the big plays that Texas are amenable to. But at the end of the day, I feel as if poise and calm can only get you so far when you're up against the number one team in the country. Texas is there for a reason. I feel like when we talk about complete teams this year in college football are hard to come by, but teams like Texas, teams like Ohio State are those teams. Oklahoma, I feel, isn't quite at that level yet, at least on the offensive side of the ball. I think their defense can keep them in this game. It's a huge X factor in this game. But in order to cover the spread comfortably, Oklahoma's going to have to find ways to put points on the board, and in a hurry, before this game gets out of hand for them. So I'm taking Texas personally, but just know that this is a game that's always been competitive in the kind of Steve Sarkisian, Brent Venables era, no matter what. And so you have to be wary of that. The next game I want to mention, another big game. Penn State travels across the country to Los Angeles, Southern California, to take on USC. They are 5.5-point favorites, though. The over-under is 47.5. Penn State minus 195 to win. USC plus 165 at home. This game, to me, feels a lot more even than people would think because USC is a very opportunistic game. As Andre says, I'm trying to find some props for the Seattle game. I feel like the best prop for this game that I mentioned is Brock Purdy hitting the over. He's going to take advantage of this weakened Seattle defense, especially that secondary. I think Reek Woolen is the heartbeat of that secondary, and losing him is a huge hit. I just don't think a guy like Trey Brown can fill in his shoes. So, taking Brock Purdy's over. I'll try and find it in my notes for you. But I feel like that's the most comfortable one, I would say, for this bet. As I believe it was over 249.5. I think he'll comfortably hit that on the Seattle side of things. I would say JSN hitting the under. He hasn't really been, quote-unquote, as impressive as I thought. He has had some nice plays here and there, but he's not comprehensively proving himself to be a wide receiver 2 or supplanting Tyler Lockett for that wide receiver 2 position. So take the under there. As the under said, they think they shut down DK, where it was questionable, not sure of his status. Also, I think Kufanga will be out as well, and that's a big impact on the 49ers secondary. But overall, I feel like DK is an unusual player because he is perhaps their best route runner. As he also says, can you give me 4 player props you like for tonight? I say Brock Purdy over, Geno Smith over, let's say DK Metcalf over, and JSN under. He says, I have a payout booster on underdog. Good luck to you, my man. In terms of DK, I just feel like it's going to be a matter of how they utilize him, right? Whether or not they trust the run game more in this one, or whether or not they, hit the pass game more often. But thank you for your comments, my man. Good luck to you in your betting exploits for tonight's game. It should be a good one. For college football, though, this was a classic game a couple of years ago between Penn State and USC, where USC, at the Rose Bowl, no less, hit a game-winning field goal in the era of Sam Darnold and Saquon Barkley, if you remember that. But this feels like a new horizon for both of these teams. For Penn State, they're going to be offense the name of the game going forward. Drew Aller has been looking more explosive this season, incorporating so many different weapons in this offense. And then the USC side of things, I feel as if they are a team that can take opportunities to make some defensive plays that can be the difference in this game. And Andre says, do you like Debo and Ayuk tonight? I do, but it's going to be difficult to see which one is better. I feel like Debo has the propensity to have the bigger plays in this game, whereas Ayuk is going to be more of an X factor in terms of extending drives. But I feel like Debo is just someone who has been a Seahawk killer throughout his career. We have no ways to stop him, no matter who our DC or head coach has been, and he just is a game wrecker on that side of the football when he's healthy for San Fran. Whereas Ayuk, I feel like it's going to be important, but not in a way where he fully impacts the game as much as a Debo Samuel can. But looking at, this Penn State USC game, I don't necessarily think it will hold much stock in the Big Ten race because both of these teams are not in the most advantageous positions going forward. Penn State still has Michigan and Ohio State to face. USC has some tough games. But overall, this game is going to be about offense versus defense. That being said, I do think USC covers the spread. It's going to be a close game, but I do think Penn State pulls this one out. Ohio State-Oregon, another big game. Another big conference game at that. OSU favored by 3.5, over under 51.5. OSU minus 135, Oregon plus 115. I feel like this game will come down to the fact that Ohio State is just a more balanced team. Their defense, perhaps the best in the entire country. Their offense, opportunistic as always. Jeremiah Smith looks like an absolute freak out there. Emeka Ibuka, still timely as Andre shouts out the Ducks. On the Ducks side of things, they have looked to be improved. Their O-line, as Andre said, Dylan Gabriel's moment of truth as well. I love Dylan Gabriel. Their O-line has really improved around him. It's going to be all about, sustaining drives, playing mistake-free football, and who knows how this game will turn out. I'm still giving Oregon the benefit of the doubt, even with their little trip-ups along the way. They are still undefeated, and on any given Saturday in college football, anything can happen, and we've seen it throughout this season. For the Ohio State side of things, I just think they need to just play their brand of football. If they do, it's going to be tough for Oregon. But Oregon has been in these moments before. They know from their Pac-12 experience how it is to try and beat top teams. Overall, I think they're going to cover, but I still think Ohio State will win this game. But that's just my opinion. I think that, it could go either way, but I feel like Ohio State just looks like a more well-balanced, well-rounded team at this point. The last one I have in my graphic, a huge Big 12 showdown, bigger than people would think. Kansas State going up against Colorado in Boulder, 6-point favorites, 56.5 over-under. Colorado State plus 190, K-State minus 225. And this could be the moment where Travis Hunter firmly plants himself in the Heisman race. Going up against a very dynamic quarterback in Avery Johnson, who's proven he can have big games in him. I feel like this Big 12 matchup will show us, as Andre says, Jason under 48 yards. That is exactly the bet that I would take, because I feel like he's not someone who can impact the game and get over 100 yards or even 70 yards, a way that Seattle might even need him to in the future. As Andre said, Avery Johnson's going to go and see in this game. That's my thing. It's going to be who's going to be more impressive, Avery Johnson or Travis Hunter, because I love Avery Johnson. He's one of my favorite quarterbacks in the entire nation. But Travis Hunter, is just a completely game-altering player. He's just someone who can take over any game. And if you want me to be honest with you, this could be a game of two shocking Heisman hopefuls. I'm saying that Avery Johnson is that good. But it's going to come down to, who can make the bigger plays. Is the stage too big for Avery? Or will Travis Hunter have a slip-up in his Heisman race? We'll have to see, but thank you all for tuning into my second segment. That will just about do it for it. Coming up for my third one, I conclude my positional rankings with the best defense and special teams units to roster for Week 6 in the NFL. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSM.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Before we get into our third segment of the day, I want to get back to my man Andre, who left a comment right before we went to break. Everybody who loves Kittle tonight. Is Seattle bad against tight ends or something? Well, they aren't necessarily good against them, but I feel like they're always going to find a way to get the football to their weapons against us, San Fran. They'll always find a way no matter what. I feel like George Kittle, out of all the tight ends who can hurt Seattle, probably is the best one. Only a couple other tight ends can truly threaten us, but I feel like Shanahan has our number in the ways he can scheme up so many different plays for his weapons, and Kittle is a beneficiary of that, as well as Debo right now, to carry this offense. Thank you for that comment. You're just making me dread this game even more, but we have to roll on in this show. It's what we do. I feel like this next segment is kind of one that will kind of play into this defensive mindset as we get into our final positional rankings of the defenses and special teams that I think you should roster in Week 6. And all four of them, have had up and down campaigns to start the year. I feel like all four of these teams, though, have players who can contribute to this team. Some of them you might be mad at me about. You can let me know in the comments. I really don't care. This is my opinion about these defenses, but I just want to present them to you, and you can pick them or not, and I just definitely feel like these are the ones that I, at the top of my head, seeing these matchups, would have rostered going ahead. But let's start off. Enough from me, I digress. Start off with the Raiders defense, the one that a lot of people will probably be mad about, going up against the Cardinals, who we know I kind of have a love-hate relationship with. I love them when their offense is on fire, and I hate them when I can't seem to get going. And so, this week in this game actually is going to be one that feels as if I might have gotten this game wrong as well. I feel like this is one of those weird games where I feel like the Cardinals offense will not show up as Andre says K9 to find the end zone tonight. I feel like, K9 is always going to have a say in this game, whether it be through only 5 or 100 carries. As he also said, amazing touchdown with the picks you gave me as well. Thanks, bro. I feel like K9, he's always going to be a weapon in the red zone. It's just a matter of if Seattle uses him or not. That's all I can say. I feel like you're making me want to dread this game even more. I'm getting very nervous about how we're going to look tonight, but I just hope that we find the right game plan to get us going and at least make this a close game, if not try and win it at the end of the day. But going back to the defensive side of things, the Raiders, this just feels like a weird game where the Cardinals will either play hot or cold. We never know with them. And so any defense that goes up against them has to feel like if early on they can dictate the play, they can set the edge, they can win. The Raiders will do exactly that. They had 11 fantasy points on 1 interception, 1 fumble recovery, and 3 sacks against LA. And they just feel like a team where, actually I am talking about the Packers. I don't know why I said the graphic where I put the Raiders in it. But that is the game this week. I'm sorry for misleading you a little bit, but it is the Packers. I kind of got confused and put the Raiders. I don't know why. The Raiders defense is not one that I would feel confident in this week. It is the Packers. So, forget what I just said. The Packers, though, are a defense, like I said, who are very opportunistic at that. So, it should be the Packers up there. I'm sorry for the misleading graphic. But then we go into a defense they actually have the right picture for, the Chargers defense, going up against the Broncos. You could definitely say these past couple of weeks is the Broncos defense that a lot of people should be choosing and rostering for their fantasy squads. But the reason why I say the Chargers defense, even with all the injury questions they have, Joey Bosa not playing to full health, and this defense never really having all the pieces together, it's one of those defenses that to me will find out their identity through consistent play against teams like the Broncos. Against teams like the Broncos, the Chargers will look very successful just because this identity that Jim Harbaugh is building is very physical. And I just don't think the Broncos offensively are a very physical team that will challenge the Chargers that much. On the other side of the ball is a different story, and I think this will be a very low-scoring game. But at the end of the day, I just feel like there's nothing that really scares me of Denver's offense at the moment. Both of these teams are going to try to win this game through the defensive side of the ball. There's no question about it. It's just going to be a matter of which defense to me right now is further along. And I feel like actually right now it's the Chargers. Because the Broncos, we've seen this kind of movie before, where their defense looks really good, but they can also have stinkers. I'm not saying that this will be a stinker for them, but I just feel like this game will be so low scoring that it won't matter which defense you choose in it. And I'm picking the Chargers. That's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments about this game because it's a weird one, but let's move on. The Steelers defense going up against the Raiders. This is the actual game where the Raiders are involved. But I think the Steelers defense will make them look silly because the Raiders offense right now is just one big question mark. Whether or not, Devontae Adams is leaving and whether or not it's going to be anytime soon, I think it will be. I think it's going to be a goner sometime next week. And the Steelers defense will kind of prey on that tension and have perhaps one of their better games this season. And not for nothing, they played very well against the Dallas team that, wanted to have a get-right game, but looked pretty ineffective in that game. Yes, there were some inclement weather conditions before the game, and it might have affected their game script, but overall, Steelers did a good job in limiting what the Cowboys could do offensively. They had 2 interceptions, 1 fumble recovery, 2 sacks, only 7 fantasy points. But this week, we're going to see that point total go up. There's a Raiders offense that really isn't answering a lot of questions at the current moment, and might have more questions to answer after 2 weeks' time or so. But we're talking about the Steelers here. We're talking about perhaps the best defense in the NFL, what they've done over the past couple of games, keeping the Steelers team competitive, and going forward, they will be the kind of bell cow of this team, carrying this team on their shoulders to victories like this against opponents that are very manageable. And that's what's going to happen, playing their best football against easy, quote-unquote, easy teams to beat. And the last defense I want to talk about before we head into our break, the Bengals. And this one looks very silly, I know, because the Bengals look like perhaps the worst defense in the NFL. And it wouldn't shock me if, they look like it again against the Giants. But the thing about the Giants offensively is that, yes, they played well against Seattle, but how much of that was sustainable and can be carried over week after week? It was very impressive that they did it without Malik Neighbors as well, but I just feel like there's no rhyme or reason week in, week out where we actually can truly gauge what the Giants can do offensively. I still think, despite that performance, Daniel Jones is a limited QB. I still think that, if you don't have a game script for him, he looks kind of lost. And so I just feel like this Bengals defense that was projecting to look like a top 10 one to start the year will finally have an easier and more manageable game to limit the big plays that they've been letting up over the past couple of weeks. Because the Giants are not, the Chiefs. The Giants are not the Ravens. They, 1 week, try and come up with a game plan for one team, and then another week they try and come up with a game plan. They don't have one kind of overarching way to win a game. And so that's why I feel like going forward, the Bengals defense will see signs of improvement. I mean, not to the tune of too many points put up in fantasy. They only had 4 last week against the Bengals, and they gave up 38 points in that game. But this is a defense that, over the past couple of weeks, much maligned, but will find its footing, I feel like. They don't have to find their footing that much either, because the Bengals offense looks very explosive right now. So, if all you ask of them is for them to be opportunistic and to get takeaways and to swing the field position battle, then that's really the hallmarks of a decent at best defense. And not for nothing, this is a schedule that shows the fact that they can get back into this race in the AFC North. And so, against the Giants, who definitely can be a trap team, they proved to be that against Seattle. Can the Bengals defense do just enough to get going? It doesn't have to be a pretty defensive performance from them. It just has to be timely. As Tattler says, Giants will keep this close at home. I think on the Giants side of things, you kind of have to have a game script for Daniel Jones to have any kind of consistency in your offense, but I agree it will be a very close one. That being said, I just feel like the Bengals defense will treat this game as a get-right game and say, hey, remember us, we're a unit to be reckoned with, and we're a unit that can get takeaways, play opportunistic football, and most importantly, be the change in the game that we need for our team. And so that's why I feel like at this moment the Bengals defense will have a get-right game. Let me know what you continue to think in the comments, because all of these defenses that I picked could be terrible picks, especially the team like the Bengals. But they're opportunistic matchups as always, and you never know how teams will try and attack them. especially teams like the teams they're facing, where, they're just trying to find some kind of iota of consistency on the offensive side of the football. So it's going to be a game of chess in that regard. But let me know what you think. But coming up next, I'm going to give you a little bit of an injury update around the league with some ensuing fantasy implications for Week 6 of the NFL season. Right back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast with our fourth segment of the day. We'll be talking about some of the big injuries, whether they have been sustained last week or recurring injuries that we continue to hear about. I just want to update you all on them and some of the fantasy implications that you'll have to account for this week. And let's start off with some of the injuries sustained this week last week to talk about. Let's start off with Devon Achane. This is perhaps the quote-unquote luckiest injury, as it's sustained before a bye week, a concussion, nevertheless. And he would have been questionable, but this is easy sledding for him. He has a week of rest, and then he'll most likely come back for their Week 7 game. So, Devon Achane, nothing to really worry about. However, I am kind of worried about how he's going to find yardage if, they don't trust him with their inconsistent QB play. So that's the big question there. As for, the concussion, it's going to be a speedy recovery, I hope, for him, because I feel like right now I might want to retract on what I said about him before the season, because he now is the biggest X factor for that Dolphins offense. Let's talk about Jonathan Taylor. Let's talk about this Colts offense in general with all the pieces that could be missing. They could be missing at least 4 pieces. They could be missing Anthony Richardson, who's still dealing with that oblique training, and he's very limited in practice, I hear. They could lose Michael Pittman, another limited participant in practice, leave with a hip injury. And they could lose Josh Downs with an ankle injury as well. And Jonathan Taylor's feel like the most pressing, because he has been the most impressive kind of player over these past couple of weeks with or without Richardson. And so, with this ankle injury, I hope that he has a speedy recovery. It said he's still questionable. I believe he was a limited participant in Wednesday's practice and today's, so we'll have to see. But ultimately, I feel like there's a good chance he plays in their matchup with the Titans. The status is a little bit iffy, but of all the players that you might want to rush back for this game, it's Jonathan Taylor. But I do kind of preach the fact that if you feel as if none of your players can go, by all means, sit them, have them rest for another week, and then they go again in a couple weeks' time. And I feel like the safest bet, especially for this Colts offense, because you don't want to lose too many games to start in Richardson's career. And especially, with, the fact that he hasn't really found a rapport with any wide receiver one. So, that's another big thing to think about for the Colts, especially this team that's trying to build something offensively. And let's talk about perhaps the most pressing wide receiver injury. Nico Collins, looking like perhaps the best receiver in the league through the first 5 weeks of the season, goes down with a hamstring in that game against the Bills on a touchdown, no less, which really sucks in that regard. Was questionable at the start of the week, but he's now headed to the IR and will miss at least 4 games of the Texans. For the Texans, in terms of fantasy, I feel like this team will still be fine just because, of that wide receiver room. But I actually don't think Stephon Diggs will be the best fantasy receiver. And I mean this in the sincerest way possible, because I still respect him for what he can do. But I just feel like C.J. Stroud's knowledge of players like Tank Dell in the system and Dalton Schultz will prove to be much more integral to how this team progresses than his relationship with Stephon Diggs. And it might create some tension, but not as much as as what Stephon Diggs had to deal with in Buffalo. So it's going to be an interesting storyline to follow this injury and how it impacts the Texans and how you view them in fantasy, but I still think they're a solid fantasy team nevertheless. Just because Nico Collins goes down doesn't mean that they can find different ways to incorporate different players into their offensive scheme, and they can do it very well in this regard. It's just a matter of, well, which player falls to the wayside a little bit more than we thought. So that's something to note. And then Aaron Rodgers' injury, going down with a high ankle sprain in that game. I feel like he's going to play through the pain no matter what, but it is notable just so you know how the Jets' offense can look and how it could affect who gets the targets, how this team plays going forward, whether or not, Todd Downing, who's now calling the plays, will try and limit Aaron Rodgers mobility-wise, and how that loss of his out-of-structure play impacts certain players. But overall, I feel like the Jets were a dumpster fire offensively to begin with anyways. So I can't really take stock in this injury just because Aaron Rodgers was not doing well statistically without the injury either. So it's just a little bit of damage control there for the Jets, but I'm starting to lose trust and faith in some of their offensive weapons who are pretty good fantasy players, especially guys like Wilson and Breece Hall. As Tactical says, Tucker Kraft goes over 41.5 yards this week. Thoughts? I think he can. I think it's just a matter of whether or not, this Packers passing attack can trust itself. That's always been the case. If the Packers passing attack trusts itself and trusts that no matter what happens throughout the game, they can find big plays down the field, then Tucker Kraft has a huge chance at going over 41.5, maybe even blowing that out of proportion. So I feel like Tucker Kraft is always going to be of value to this Packers offense, especially with their injury crisis as well with Christian Walton. Let's hope for a speedy recovery there from him. But for the time being, I just feel like he's one of their most versatile weapons to utilize. So definitely think that he can go over 41.5 yards this week. But going back to the injuries, I feel like the Aaron Rodgers one is one that we can't place too much weight in because I really have had not many expectations for him this season going forward. And then another big QB injury, perhaps a bigger impact as well. Derek Carr going down with an oblique injury in Monday Night Football against the Chiefs. No real timeline for this, but it does look like he will miss multiple weeks. At the very least, in my opinion, he'll have to miss 4 weeks, maybe even 3. I think that, this is going to be very impactful to the Saints and how, they handle Spencer Rattler, who was the starter this week against the Bucs, and his command of the offense. I actually liked what I saw out of Jake Haener, not for nothing, if you're a Saints fan. But I feel like going forward, Spencer Rattler can be an appealing option in terms of a deeper league in fantasy, but it's going to be all about the weapons that work around him. How do they help uplift him and elevate his play through their play as well? Chris Olave is going to have to be much better. He's going to have to be much more intelligent in his route tree, much more intelligent in the way he attacks opposing defenses, as well as Rashid Shaheed. Who knows what Spencer Rattler can do with his deep ball? Who knows how he can diagnose defense? It's going to have to be all about them. And so, in terms of fantasy value, I think it decreases mightily should, Dennis Allen want to play it safe with a guy like Rattler. But if Rattler proves that he can do things better than Derek Carr can do in this offense, the sky's the limit for them. I feel as if, why not take a flyer on Spencer Rattler, even though Jake Haener proved that he can show some moxie and poise late in games, coming in that cleanup duty for Derek Carr. So that's something interesting to monitor. Which of these quarterbacks emerges from this kind of quote-unquote mini QB competition? And furthermore, which of them can actually lead the offense in a way either equal to or better than Derek Carr? But overall, I'm more worried about the Saints as a whole, as Underside made a trade for Cook. I believe he's talking about James Cook just to find out he's injured. I actually didn't even know that James Cook was injured. As Andre also now in kind of panic mode says, do I start Dowdle or Chase Brown? I actually did not know that James Cook was injured, and that's weird because he is on my personal fantasy team and I did not get the notification. So in terms of starting Dowdle or Chase Brown, I would pick Chase Brown, even though I think both of these guys are more RB2 types. I just feel like Chase Brown will get more opportunities, whereas Dowdle in that Cowboys offense, sheesh. Talk about one-trick pony for the Cowboys offense. They really disrespect who they have at their disposal, and Dowdle has been the biggest kind of, not necessarily, how do you put it, the opposite of benefit, biggest opposite of beneficiary, for lack of a better term, in that offense. So I would just say Chase Brown. It is what it is. And now I have to find my own personal fantasy running back going forward for the short term, I hope, in replacement of James Cook. And then the last thing to note here is that all the players that I mentioned on the PUP list at the start of the year, guys like TJ Hawkinson, guys like Nick Chubb, will all begin to practice in a couple weeks' time. Now, in terms of how you view them, say whether or not they're still on waiver wires or whether or not you might want to acquire them in trade, I say only go for the trade once you see how they fit into their offense. I don't want expectations to be high for guys like Hawkinson and Chubb, and for them to come into their new offenses and suddenly look lost. Because that could be bound to happen, especially for a guy like Chubb, who I don't think can come back from the same injury twice. So that's something to be wary of going forward, but it's just something to monitor as well if you're thinking about guys coming off the PUP list and coming back into the game, because it definitely changes things. It changes how you might view trades going forward, especially in the middle of the season, because you don't necessarily want to panic just yet, but you're also kind of in the thick of your fantasy league. So I think that if you choose to go for a trade, or whether or not they're still in the waiver wire, hopefully they might be, I think it's going to come down to how you have to see them in their respective offenses to determine them. Let me know what you think in the comments, but that was just about to do it for this segment. Coming up for our last segment of the day, I start my new tradition, did this segment last week with my Chris's picks of the week. 4 games that I feel like can be interesting ones to bet on. We'll be right back to conclude this show with that after this short break. Hello everyone, and welcome back into our final segment of the day here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hope you all enjoyed the show. And we conclude today's show with my new tradition here in the show, Chris's picks of the week. 4 or 5 games I'm going to pick from each week going forward that I feel like will be the best bets in terms of the spread and things of that nature. So without further ado, let's jump right into it and conclude the show with a bang. Let's start off with tonight's game. We went over this a little bit yesterday, but I want to go over this a little bit more in detail because it seems like it's a huge topic of discussion in the comment sections for today's game, especially from Andre and Tap to Learn. Shout out to both of you for your comments today. But in this game, 49ers 3.5-point favorites on the road, nonetheless. I feel like this is indicative of how difficult it is to gauge the NFC West in terms of the rivalry. Because the Seahawks-49ers rivalry throughout my entire life has been perhaps the the biggest one on the West Coast. And no matter through its many peaks and valleys where one team would take the advantage, then another one would seize it, and in this particular era, it's the 49ers. This certainly feels like one of those games where both of these teams don't really have a proven identity yet, and I feel like this game tonight is not going to be indicative of the teams we'll see a couple weeks down the road. I feel like this is not necessarily a litmus test, but it certainly is a diagnosis of how both of these teams can adjust to different challenges. And I think right now, my personal pick, my Chris's pick of the week for this game is the 49ers minus 3.5. I feel like Seattle will keep it close enough, but at the end of the day, how long can this offense really keep up with, the elites of the NFC? That's the big question. For as long as all these defensive stars are out, it's going to have to be up to the offense. And I just don't know how sustainable it is, especially with that offensive line. Because the offensive line is atrocious as well. It's one of the worst pass block win rates in the NFL at 43.8. And I don't see how it's going to improve going forward. So it's going to be all about, by hook or by crook, kind of going in. As Tapson also says, I really like the Lions giving a field goal to the Cowboys. Kitty's coming off a bye and ready to roar. I actually agree with that. I'm shocked the Dallas Cowboys are the favorites in this game. I believe it's still at home, like you said. But I think the Lions are back with a vengeance. They're going to take a lot of positives from what they did in Seattle and translate it to a very iffy Cowboys defense. I have not much faith in the Cowboys defense right now, especially with all the injuries piling up in that regard. So I completely agree with that. Give me the Lions giving a field goal on the road against the Cowboys. That was actually the game. Although I did say in my predictions the Cowboys would cover, so it's going to be a weird thing to watch here. Because the Lions can win and the Cowboys can cover still, but you never know. I think that this one, even at home, the Lions are favorites, but I still like them. I think that, it's going to be an interesting game, but I just feel like I'm along the same lines as you here by saying that the Lions will just be the dominant team, be the superior team in this matchup, just because that's what they are like. And he also mentioned from last segment about the injuries to both Hockenson and Chubb. Both injuries were horrific. I want to touch on this before we go back to my picks. But Chubb's was worse. I completely agree, especially considering that that's his second injury in that similar area, that ACL, MCL area of his career. The first one, yes, he could come back from because he was still young. He was coming out of college. But this one was in his age 29 season. Now, coming into a Browns offense that might just be dependent on him going forward. I don't know how much that pressure is going to seep into his play. And it really sucks because he's one of my favorite players in the league. A lot of yours probably as well for who he is on and off the field. But, man, it just sucks to see a guy like him have to come back from this injury with all the pressure and weight on his shoulders. And it seems unfair to him as well. But let's get back into our picks. And then let's transition from the Lions-Cowboys, which should be an interesting game just because the Lions on the road might find some pratfalls, especially off the bye. But I still like them in this game. I think the Cowboys will cover. Bucs-Saints. Bucs minus 3.5 point favorites. I think that, this game just got made a little bit more, not necessarily boring, but a little less intriguing than it would have been had Carr been in this game. But this is an exciting opportunity for a guy like Spencer Rattler, who actually at the start of his college career was coveted as perhaps a future number 1 draft pick, but kind of fell down the ranks, as he transferred throughout his career. But now he has the opportunity to prove why a lot of people were hyped about him at the start of his college career as he leads the Saints into Raymond James Stadium. But the Bucs, I feel like, are still the best team in the NFC South, in my opinion. Nothing about that game against the Falcons proved to me that the Falcons were truly better in the Bucks because it was such a fluky final couple of minutes in that game. I still can't get over how that sequence of events happened. The Bucks should have had that game in the bag, and somehow they found themselves on the losing side of it. Some voodoo magic over there in Atlanta. But I think that this game got just much more comfortable for them. I think they'll comfortably cover the spread now, especially now that, you know, all the weight of the world is on this rookie QB's shoulders, and I think very highly of him, but I just don't think he'll be able to keep up with this high-powered Bucs offense with Baker, Chris Godwin, and the like, all kind of gelling perfectly right now. And so, give me the Bucs covering the spread comfortably and proving how dominant they can be in the NFC South in a division that no one truly stands out in, but one of them has to kind of be the team to take it over. And I think the Bucs so far, the teams. Yes, you can say the Falcons, after that big win, they already have 2 in the conference, in the division. But I just think the Bucs are playing with a sense of swagger that I really like out of them. So that's my pick, but you can think otherwise in the comments. It's going to be a weird game. But the last one I want to pick, Cards-Packers. Packers is 5-point favorites. This one feels like a game where the Cardinals offense could show up, but it is kind of risky to say so, but I'm still sticking with them covering this game. I just feel like the Packers are a good, solid team, and Jordan Love just brings this energy to this team that I really love. But when you look at the injuries, when you look at what the defense is doing by being quote-unquote more opportunistic than overall very good or great or elite at what they do, I'm kind of skeptical of how they can account for what the Cardinals can look like when they're at their best. Because when the Cardinals are at their best, I feel like this is a team that can really hurt you down the field a lot. Whether it be through Kyler Murray's kind of north-south run game at the QB position, James Conner's physicality, Marvin Harrison Jr.'s skill, and the opportunistic play of guys like Bride, Wilson, and Dortch. I just like the profile of the Cardinals at their best, but that's the thing. I can't necessarily love them that much if they're not at their best all the time. Because if they're not at their best all the time, then they look like one of the weakest in the entire league. As tackle is packed by a TD at least. Jacobs Day. Take the over 2, 47.5. I like that, but I feel like the Packers are a team that can find ways to slip up a little bit. I don't necessarily trust this wide receiver room as much as I thought I would going into this season, and I don't necessarily think the defense are as solid as people think. I appreciate the fact that they're fantastic at taking the football away from opposing offenses, but I don't think it translates into a defense that can slow down offenses. That's why I think the Cardinals will stay in this game longer than people think. And not for nothing, I feel like the Packers have this kind of pressure surrounding them in this division as well. Because against the Minnesota, they had a chance to win that game and blew it. And the Lions are always going to be there. So they got to be sitting there thinking, well, we're in a very make or break situation here. We're up against a Cardinals team that, not for nothing, have some impressive wins this season, have some impressive performances this season. As Tyler Lewis has agreed on the Packer D, so bet the over. I will take the over in this game, just because I think that highly of the Cardinals offense. But, it's a weird game. And I can't necessarily say that week in, week out, the Cardinals will consistently perform enough to say that they can consistently cover spreads like they can. But I feel like this is the game where the Cardinals can prove that they can stick around with people. And they can stick around with people in a way that they can sustain, hopefully. And so, going forward, I feel as if I'm going to shy away from the cards of betting team, but this feels like a game where you can take advantage of their offensive skills and really hone in on, okay, both of these offenses are very potent, so let me just go crazy in what I decide to do betting-wise. But all 4 of these games are in the NFC, and there are 2 divisional contests here. And the significance of the games I pick will vary week in, week out, but this just feels like a week where a lot's going to be said about certain teams in the NFC. This feels like a very NFC-heavy week. So the unpredictable nature of how I'll pick my games should be a fun thing to do, but hopefully you like this segment, and going forward it's something I can prove to you guys can have staying power, and you can comment on it however you like. But that will just about do it for this segment and today's show. Thank you all for tuning in. I've been Christopher Shepard. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show in the network if you so feel inclined. Also, leave a like or a super chat, super thanks for stickers features in the comment sections going forward if you would like to hear your opinion said out loud on real time. Also, you can leave tips or donations as well. They're greatly appreciated by me, my fellow podcasters as well. Go check them out. But thank you most importantly to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing me to do this show. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, for another great edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. But other than that, thank you all for watching. I've been Christopher Shepard. I am out.